The video is shocking.
It really is distressing, and I want you to put yourselves in the shoes of those Jewish Londoners in that part of London. But also with hate crime, there's a ripple of fear that spreads through the entire community. So I'm here today, Susanna, to reassure all Londoners, particularly Jewish Londoners, they'll be seeing more police presence in parts of London, particularly around, of course, places of worship and schools that are Jewish, but also in those communities. The Met Police Service has a zero tolerance towards hate crime. I was in touch yesterday with both the Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner. It's good they've taken swift action, but we won't tolerate this. Of course, many of us feel really strongly about what's happening in Israel, in Gaza and in the West Bank. It's heartbreaking. What we can't have, though, is those feelings spilling over to hate crime in our city.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, what are you doing to protect the Jewish community, all communities, but, you know, obviously from what we've seen, there is a rise in fear amongst that community?
Unfortunately, Susanna, we've seen in recent years, whenever there's tension in the Middle East and violence, it can spill over into our city. Our city is the most diverse city in the world. So a number of things we're doing to reassure Londoners, particularly those from Jewish communities and others who are worried about an increase in hate crime. There will be an increased police presence. We're in regular contact with the Community Security Trust. This is a brilliant organisation that works with Jewish communities. But also we're in touch with the Jewish families and leaders across our city. My message to anybody who's the victim of race crime is please report it. I don't think if you report it, nothing will be taken. In fact, the opposite is the case. You can go to the Met Police Service website. It's really easy to do, and the police take this very seriously.
Sadiq, I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. It's anti-Semitic. It's also misogynistic, by the way. And I think, you know, the thing to say about these men, that they feel that it's absolutely fine to say these disgusting derogatory comments about women, I think says a lot as well. Now, we know that they have arrests being made, but how do we even get to that point? Why do we think it's even, that these boys think it's acceptable in a coordinated convoy across London and think they can send these disgusting, vulgar messages through a megaphone and think they'll get away with it?
Well, that's something they'll need to explain when they are hopefully charged and go to court. There'll be a racially aggravating element of any offence. Unfortunately, misogyny isn't yet a hate crime. We're lobbying the government to make it a hate crime, but you're spot on. It's a pattern of behaviour we see with those with extreme views. The point I'd make is this, look, there were some banners also on display during the protests on Saturday that were unacceptable and were clearly racist. I think, look, we can all feel strongly about what's happening in other parts of the world, but this is 3,000 miles away, and for people in our country to hold responsible the followers of a religion is wrong, and it's really important, not just people like me, but others unequivocally condemn this sort of racist language and behaviour.
Sadiq Khan, you have just been re-elected to London Mayor for another term. But there are concerns about the rise of fear amongst different groups in the city. You yourself said in the wake of the death of Sarah Everard that London isn't safe for women and girls to walk the streets. We know that there has been a 60% increase in incidents of knife crime while you have been mayor. 13 teenagers have been murdered in London, compared to 14 for the whole of 2020. Is London a safe place at the moment? And why is crime and fear rising under your watch?
Well, let's disentangle a number of points you've made, Susanna. Firstly, thank you for the congratulations on being re-elected. I meet regularly bereaved families, not only when I was MP, but also as the mayor. It's heartbreaking. And we always try to learn from interventions that could have been made to stop particularly a young person being the victim of crime. Because of our public health approach in London, both being tough on crime, but also on the causes, investing in young people, giving them constructive things to do, progress has been made. So it's not quite right when you say there's been an increase in violent crime. What you've seen over the last few years now is thankfully progress made in reducing youth violence, in reducing the victims of knife crime. I'm not complacent. And making progress here by both investing in more police officers, but also in young people. And when I explained in relation to violence against women and girls, that's the experience of women and girls across the country. You know, since last year's International Women's Day in early March until this year's, across the country, 118 women lost their lives by the hands of men. 12 of those in London. That's clearly unacceptable. And so, men like me have to listen to the experiences of women and girls, and that's what motivates me to redouble my efforts to bear down on all forms of violent crime, not least violence against women and girls, as well as young people.
It's quite a thing, isn't it, for you as the mayor of the city to say that it's not a safe place for women and girls. And you dispute the figures on knife crime. But I would say that the incidence of knife crime and the threat of violence to our young people means that it's not a safe place either for our youngsters.
Well, you can't run away from the experience that women have and that bereaved families have. It's just a fact. And what I'm not going to do is put my head in the sand. Instead, what I'm going to do is continue to invest in the police, but also continue to invest in young people. In relation to the experience of women and girls in our city and across our country, it's got to start in schools, teaching boys how they should respect girls. And it's got to start in school with teaching boys about some sort of behaviour being unacceptable. And that goes into adulthood. One of the reasons why I support the announcement today by Keir Starmer to make sexual harassment a criminal offence is the public realm, whether it's public transport or streets, should be safe places for women. Women who are adults shouldn't be choosing the footwear based on how fast they can run or their items of clothing because they don't want to be harassed. And so the police will work incredibly hard, as they always do. I'll work incredibly hard to support them, but we shouldn't pretend that there are easy answers that can be solved just overnight. And that's why it's really important that the big mandate I've got means that I can use the time I've got to make sure we both invest in our police, continue to do so, but also in this public health approach, Anna. You've seen over the last few years, we've now got youth clubs reopened that were closed down by the government. We've now got youth workers re-employed. We've got coaches, we've got mentors going into schools, stopping children being excluded so we can make sure those young people have the potential fulfilled rather than another young person losing his or her life prematurely.
Can we ask you about the latest situation with the pandemic and the coronavirus? Some worrying news on Friday about the emergence of the Indian variant across some parts of the country, not just Bolton and Blackburn. We understand it is present in London. How worried are you?
Well, I spoke yesterday with my health advisor and also last week with Public Health England and the NHS. Of course, we're concerned about any new variant. This Indian variant is one of concern. So my message to Londoners and those across the country is please test regularly. Everybody who's test positive in London using a PCR test, we're now doing testing of the genomics to see what the strain is. And if somebody has tested positive and has the Indian variant, there's additional testing and tracing and tracking taking place. We need to make sure we bear down on this virus. One of the things I'm lobbying the government for is to accelerate the rollout of the vaccine in those parts of our city and country where there is high levels of this particular variant. Why? Because the early evidence appears to be, we heard from Hillary earlier on, that the vaccine does appear to reduce the likelihood of catching this virus, decelerates the spreading, but also the consequences are less severe. That's the evidence from both India and Oxford.
Do you think that in London, the age of vaccination should be lowered?
Yeah, in those parts of London where we're concerned about the variant, there's 4 or 5 boroughs where there does appear to be small clusters of this particular Indian variant. Now, what I'm asking the government to do with the fantastic NHS is to, in those parts of London, younger Londoners receive the vaccine sooner than other parts of London.
Sadiq, you have one of the biggest Indian populations in the country, in London, across West London, Hounslow, Southall. We know that big Indian communities. Now, they would have benefited from the Indian not being on that red list sooner, because it means they could have come back freely without having to quarantine in a hotel. And a lot of would have been grateful for that. But do you still think that actually the government failed in that respect and India should have been on the red list on April the 9th, the same time neighbouring countries, Pakistan and Bangladesh, who had lower rates of infection on the 7-day average? Do you think the government should have placed India on the red list then?
Well, yes, but can I just make this point? It's really important, Adil, in the context of what we're saying is about 14 months ago, we saw a big increase in hate crime against East and Southeast Asians, Londoners of Chinese origin. What I don't want to see is an increase in any hatred towards Londoners who are Indian. They're not responsible for this particular strain. But I think you're spot on. I heard the conversation earlier on. It was inexplicable to me that Bangladesh and Pakistan were added on a red list, in my view, rightfully so. But because the Prime Minister was planning to go to India on a trade trip and didn't want to cause offence to Prime Minister Modi, India wasn't placed on the red list, and only placed on the red list once the Prime Minister cancelled his plans for India. We'll have to wait and see the consequence of that mistake. That being said, Adil, London is reopening today to a large extent. We've got a brilliant campaign, the biggest domestic tourism campaign London's ever seen, to encourage Londoners safely to visit our bars, our restaurants, our cultural venues, our museums and galleries, and also to invite those not from London to have a great holiday in London, the world's best bars, restaurants, live music venues and so forth. So come to London and come safely.
Are you gonna start hugging today? Are you going to hug someone you haven't hugged yet today?
I'm going to see my mum after work today. I've received both doses of the vaccine, so has mum. It's been a long time. And if you think I'm a hugger, my mum's a hugger. We're going to hug safely later on today, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, everyone should be a hugger with their mum. Just on the bars and restaurants, do you have any wariness about urging everybody to rush back indoors?
One of the things that I've been really impressed by is how incredibly responsible our bars, restaurants, attractions, cultural venues are. They are COVID safe. They worked so hard, Susanna. They spent a lot of money making sure they're safe. I'm encouraging people to go back to the bars, the restaurants, the cultural venues, the attractions. I'll be going out tonight after hugging my mum for a meal with friends in the heart of our city. We've got the best restaurants in the world. They've suffered. And so not only can you have a great time going out and be safe, but also you're protecting jobs. And that's why I'd encourage all Londoners to come back to the West End. But those across the country who are crestfallen and not being able to go overseas, don't worry. You've got the entire world's cuisine and culture in London. Come to London.
Okay. All right, Sadiq Khan, thanks very much indeed.